So I'm Alex Leese, CEO of ProNet Gaming, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about a number of aspects of the LATAM market as a headline sponsor of the EGR Power LATAM Virtual Summit. And what better time to do this than when I'm actually in Brazil? So what I'd like to do is give you some real on-the-ground visibility of what's happening over here, with some real opinions that maybe go against the grain of the many articles that are published every day on LATAM gaming. I'm going to talk about regulation, marketing, product, forward thinking and planning, and looking at some specific examples of what has worked well so far from a B2C perspective. So let's look at the general aspects of the LATAM market first, before we drill down into each country. So firstly, forward planning and market entry. This relies upon relationships. LATAM, from what I've seen of it, is not one that relies upon, formal procurement processes per se, but it places much more emphasis on the personal relationships that can be fostered, and hence that's why it's crucial to have the right local partner or representative on the ground. It's not a territory that can be run from afar, but it needs to have boots on the ground locally, someone who can open the doors at the media agencies, football clubs, sports associations for sponsorships, etc., or even the relationships with local governors and politicians. Many of the tier 1 operators may be reluctant to have to give away a percentage of their business to a local partner, and perhaps their role could be questioned, but it's worth its weight in gold, and it's the one thing that makes the markets work. Secondly, on product, I've read a lot recently with the view that the product needs to be tropicalized. I've no idea what that means. In fact, I can't think of anything more patronizing. Let's not forget that a lot of successful brands have been operating here for a long time and have done very well by managing a Western European style sportsbook with a huge range of casino products. Yes, the ordering of the sportsbook may need to be different with the prominence of different leagues, for example. And yes, you may need a few additional bingo and video bingo providers, along with local payment service providers, but that's the same for any market. Whether it be Africa, Asia or LATAM, that's just not specific to LATAM. Furthermore, there's no reason to suggest that punters in LATAM may be any less sophisticated. And ultimately, as you move from grey markets to a regulated market, it's a process of education to attract a larger number of recreational punters to fill up the pot of large volume customers. I think sometimes people can forget that we're in bookmaking, and it's not just a vanilla e-commerce website that we're running. So let's please try to get away from this perception of tropicalisation and talk instead about localisation. And for me, the most important thing to localise is actually the brand and the marketing, the choice of the right ambassadors and the right sponsorships. I'm going to come on to marketing a bit later on when I look at the individual countries. However, one thing that's worth highlighting right now, I think, is the excellent work that Parimatch have done with the signing of the professional Counter-Strike player Marcelo David, aka Coldzera. They've signed them as their global esports ambassador. And Parimatch, they always make eye-catching choices when it comes to the ambassadors. And this one is really interesting for me because it's clearly targeting what they see as the potential for esports in LATAM. Now, from a product point of view, LATAM has always been skewed towards retail, if you remember. But with the evolution of esports, this may be a factor to maybe tempt a larger number of players online, because obviously it's naturally aligned to online sports betting, with it being online gaming. So let's start to look at some of the individual countries in terms of what they're doing. So Colombia is the obvious place to start, given that it's by far the most advanced. It mirrors the regulations in Spain very, very closely, and it is of huge credit, of course, to the local regulator Coljuegos that many of the larger brands from Europe, such as William Hill, Entain, Betson and Betfair, have all had the confidence to obtain a license with a view to investing heavily to gain a market share. That said, there is the possibility that it is already approaching saturation, with now close to 20 operators over there who are fully licensed. And but that doesn't mean, of course, that these larger operators are going to come in and simply take over the market. We have to remember that there are a number of very, very strong local operators who have a majority market share and have extensive retail networks and payments points of presence, and they will take some beating. So it is crucial, really, that these larger brands, that they embrace the idea that they're going to need to localize the payments infrastructure within that country. Next, let's have a look at Mexico, which is a regulated market that's been dominated by one brand for such a long time, but we may now start to see some up-and-coming licensed brands to challenge that position. You have to remember here that the Mexican regulations, they stem from a long-standing land-based casino market, with the larger ones being based in Mexico City and Monterrey and Chihuahua, the wealthier provinces of Mexico. And hence, the choice of a local partner here is critical, as the online license, it can't be sought independently. It must be accompanied by a retail license. In fact, the online license sits underneath the retail license. So some operators have chosen to partner up with the broadcasters to gain the television coverage, and others have gone with the land-based casinos. It does also have the US market crossover. Okay, so with those operators now who are investing heavily in the US, they will inevitably see some leakage of that investment in sports advertising or sponsorships to carry over into Mexico, which effectively gives them a double bubble boost on the marketing penetration. So it's a very, very interesting thing. This also means that, along with some of the other Central American countries, it does tend to have a closer resemblance to the US in terms of its sports books and the way that people bet. So it kind of ends up now as a sort of hybrid between the European and the US sports books. Of course, that mirrors the the kind of equal interest in both the European and US leagues and sports, along with some of the US origin horse racing, for example. I touched on Central America, and this is one area that does tend to be forgotten. However, for me, there is a significant potential in those markets. Something that Betcris, for example, they realized pretty early on the potential over there. So this is the likes of El Salvador, Panama, so on and so forth. Many of the lottery operators are, of course, scaling up online in those countries, and that's an area that we are monitoring with interest. Moving much further south, so after a long and protracted process, Buenos Aires province finally selected their 7 chosen operators, something that I was personally leading at my previous role at William Hill. And it'll be interesting to see what those same operators do in the other provinces, given that they may choose to go down the authorization route for regulation as opposed to the concession model that was adopted in the Buenos Aires province. It also remains to be seen what the situation is with regards to sponsorships, etc. Of course, the prominence, of the 4 or 5 main clubs in that province, they will no doubt be up for grabs in terms of betting partnerships. Peru also remains on everyone's radar. It's got a sensible potential 12% tax rate on NGR. It's got some strong local brands like Incabet. In fact, I think, like in many ways, I can see that market becoming a bit like Colombia, with strong local brands, a reliance on retail, and a population of 40 million, so it cannot be ignored. And I do feel almost as if it's the one to come next, ahead of maybe some of the other ones that have been mooted recently. There are many, many others that I could cover, but I think that we have to talk about the big one, which is Brazil, or at least it could be. I think it's fair to say that it's been a frustrating time over the last 2 years since sports betting was legalized. However, the absence of regulation has not prevented many foreign operators from engaging, for example, with football club sponsorships and TV advertising. Those examples might be Casa de Apostas with Santos. You've got NetBet with Vasco da Gama. You've got sportsbet.io with Flamengo. I think for me the most interesting one I've seen recently has been the Betano sponsorship of Atlético Mineiro, which is a club with a big history and a wide fan base, and that is not simply a name on the shoulder or the back. It's a main shirt sponsorship. So that will be interesting to see how that works out for them. And you know, the thing with these clubs is that the scale is enormous. You know, Flamengo have 40 million supporters, plus many more in the north of Brazil who had them as their second team. Corinthians, 26 million. Sao Paulo, 18 million. You know, if these brands can engage them and their fans, then there's a huge opportunity there. And this is the kind of localization that I was referring to earlier. So when you look, for example, at what Sportingbet have done, you know, with their TV advertising campaign, which I've seen a lot since I've been over here, across ESPN and Fox with the Premier League coverage, using Marcelo as their ambassador, it's a very, very smart campaign, and they've obviously consolidated their position here as the market leader at the moment. The same obviously applies to what Betcris have done, using Ronaldinho Gaúcho as their main ambassador. You know, that creates immediate resonance. But ultimately, it all depends upon the regulation, and there's been a few U-turns so far. First, it was the authorization model, right, like with Spain and Colombia. Then it was the concession model of maybe up to 20 licenses. That was put forward. I have to say that if it does go down the concession route, then depending upon the finance requirements of the brands that will be applying for the licenses, it's inevitable that some will miss out and lose their investment over here. So I guess the question now, right now, becomes about the risk that they're willing to take on in the ongoing absence of regulation. And it's a question of actually, can they make enough money now to cover the marketing and sponsorship investments so that if they do miss out on a license, they'll be able to exit without incurring huge losses. So yes, as many articles have been saying, you know, it could be the largest betting market in LATAM, but it must be remembered that this is only a potential in the absence of regulation. It is expected to kick in, I believe, in mid-2022, although it will be finalised in terms of structure this summer, we hope. But I think it's, you know, a rather lazy assumption just to say that it's going to be enormous, because there's a lot of variables actually that could change that pretty quickly. I could talk about this all day, but EGR, they've probably correctly limited me to 20 minutes, but it's a wonderful market to be involved in, and we would be delighted to talk to new operators and investors in the EGR community area after this session to explain how we can help launch brands in these markets with the right strategy and the right product. But thank you once again, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you.